In the year 1876, deep within the Sangre de Cristo Mountains of New Mexico Territory, a man made a promise to his dying wife that he would never allow another Apache woman to suffer alone. It was a promise that would nearly cost him his life. But some promises, he would learn, are worth bleeding for. The morning sun had barely crested the eastern peaks when Jacob Mackenzie first heard the scream. It was brief, cut short like a blade through silk, and it came from somewhere in the canyon
Quiet
below.
night out
His
here.
hands froze on his rifle,
Aye.
every muscle
Good
in
for
his
the
6'2"
soul.
frame
Tomorrow's
going
ride
still
will
as
be
stone.
long.
For 17 years he had lived in these mountains, and in that time he had learned to read every sound the wilderness made. The cry of a hawk hunting, the warning bark of a deer, the challenge roar of a territorial bear. This was different. This was human. This was a woman. Jacob moved through the pine forest like smoke given form, his buckskin jacket blending with the shadows, his moccasins silent on the carpet of needles beneath the towering trees. His beard, dark brown and thick as winter fur, framed a face carved by weather and solitude. His hair, long enough to brush his shoulders, was tied back with a strip of leather. Every step was deliberate, measured, the movement of a man who knew that in these mountains, hasty choices meant quick graves. The scent hit him first, smoke, but not the clean smell of a cooking fire. This carried the acrid tang of burned leather and something else, something that made the hair on the back of his neck stand straight. As he crept closer to the ridge overlooking the old Apache summer camp, a memory struck him with the force of a physical blow. 2 years ago, this same mountainside, his wife Aasha lying on their bed in the cabin, her beautiful face gaunt with fever, her breathing shallow and labored. The sickness had come fast, too fast for even the healing herbs her people knew so well. He had held her hand, feeling the life drain from her fingers like water through a sieve. Her final words still echoed in the hollow places of his heart. "She die," she had whispered in Apache, her native tongue. "My brother, promise me something." Her grip had tightened with desperate strength. "Promise me you will help our people, any of them. If they suffer, if they need you, promise." He had promised. How could he not? She had given him 15 years of joy in a world that offered precious little. She had taught him to see the sacred in the ordinary, to find family among the pines, to understand that loneliness was not the same as being alone. And then she had left him, and for 2 years he had kept that promise by staying away from everyone, buried in his grief like a man in a snowdrift. Now, peering over the ridge into the abandoned summer camp below, Jacob understood that his time of hiding was over. The woman was tied to a thick post in the center of the clearing. Her dress, once blue calico, hung in tatters around her thin frame. Her long black hair fell across her face like a curtain of midnight. But even from this distance, Jacob could see the raw marks on her wrists, where rawhide bindings had cut deep. She was unconscious, her head tilted forward, her body held upright only by the ropes that bound her. 2 men sat by a dying fire 50 yards away, passing a bottle between them. Their laughter carried on the morning air, coarse and cruel. One wore a black duster despite the summer heat. The other had a scar that ran from his left eye to his jaw, a livid line of destroyed flesh that twisted his face into a permanent sneer. Jacob counted heartbeats, his mind working through possibilities with the cold precision that had kept him alive through 2 decades of mountain living. The smart move would be to wait until dark, to plan, to scout their numbers, to find out if more men were nearby. But the woman's head lolled to one side, and even from this distance he could see the shallow rise and fall of her chest. She was dying. Whatever these men had done to her, whatever suffering they had inflicted, it was killing her by slow degrees. The promise rose in his memory like a voice from the grave. Help our people. If they suffer, if they need you. Jacob moved. He came down the slope like a hunting cat, using every rock and shadow, every fold in the terrain. The two men were drunk enough that a bear could have walked through their camp, and they might not have noticed. When Jacob reached the post where the woman was tied, he pulled his knife from his belt and began sawing at the rawhide bindings. The woman's eyes snapped open. In that instant, before conscious thought could catch up with reflex, she threw a wild punch at his face. Jacob caught her fist in his free hand, gentle but firm, and leaned close enough that she could see his eyes. "She die," he whispered in Apache. "Sister, I am a friend of the people." She froze. Her eyes, dark brown and filled with a pain that went deeper than flesh, searched his face. She was young, perhaps 28, with the high cheekbones and copper skin of the mescalero. Even weakened, even broken by whatever hell she had endured, there was something unbroken in her gaze, something fierce. "Who?" she managed, her voice a rasping whisper. "Who are you?" "Jacob Mackenzie, husband of Aasha of the Red Paint people." He kept cutting the ropes as he spoke. "I am here to help you." Recognition flickered in her eyes at the mention of Aasha's name. The Apache communities in these mountains were small, interconnected. Word traveled. "Aasha is gone," she whispered. 2 years passed. "Yes," Jacob said simply. The rope parted with a final cut. "But I am not." Behind them, one of the men belched loudly and shouted something Jacob could not make out. There was no more time for talk. He caught the woman as she collapsed forward, her legs unable to hold her weight. She could not have weighed more than a child, all bone and sinew, the flesh melted away by days of starvation. "Can you run?" he asked. She shook her head, frustrated tears standing in her eyes. "Can barely stand." Jacob did not hesitate. He lifted her in his arms, cradling her against his chest, and moved toward the creek that ran along the eastern edge of the camp. Behind them, he heard a shout of alarm. "The squaw is gone! She's escaped!" Gunshots cracked through the morning air, bullets whining past like angry hornets. Jacob did not return fire. He had one job now, one purpose. Get this woman to safety. Everything else was noise. He waded into the creek, the cold mountain water soaking through his boots, and began moving upstream. The water would mask their scent and their tracks, would buy them precious minutes while the men searched the surrounding forest. By the time they figured out the trick, Jacob and the woman would be miles away. 2 miles upstream, where the creek ran through a narrow gorge, Jacob climbed out onto the northern bank and carried his burden into a cave he had used as shelter during winter storms. It was not large, perhaps 15 feet deep, but it cut back into the rock face far enough that a fire built in the rear would not be visible from outside. More importantly, the smoke would dissipate through cracks in the stone ceiling, leaving no telltale column to mark their position. He laid the woman down gently on a bed of pine boughs he kept stored in the cave, and immediately set to work building a fire. She watched him through half-closed eyes, consciousness fading in and out like a guttering candle. When the fire was crackling softly, Jacob pulled his canteen from his pack and held it to her lips. "Slow," he instructed. "Sips, not gulps." She drank, and the water seemed to bring her back to herself. Her eyes focused, really focused, on him for the first time. "Why did you help me?" Jacob pulled a strip of cloth from his spare shirt and began cleaning the wounds on her wrists with water he had warmed by the fire. His hands were gentle, practiced. "Made a promise to someone," he said quietly. "Long time ago." "To Aasha?" "Yes." The woman was silent for a long moment, studying his face in the firelight. "I am Nelini Ashwood," she said finally. "My mother was Ayana of the Mescalero. My father was Thomas Ashwood, a trader." Jacob nodded. He had heard of Thomas Ashwood, a good man by all accounts, fair in his dealings, respectful of Apache customs. "Where is your father now?" Something broke in Nelini's face, a crack in the armor she had been maintaining. "Dead," she whispered. 12 days ago. They came to our trading post, burned it, killed my father, killed my mother." Her voice went flat, empty of everything but a cold, terrible fury. "Took me." Jacob kept cleaning her wounds, giving her time to steady herself. He had seen this before, this moment when grief threatened to swallow a survivor whole. "The men who held you," he said gently. "Who are they?" "Outlaws," Nelini said. "Led by the one with the scar. His name is William Jessup. They call him Scar." She paused, drew a shaking breath. "They kept me for 9 days. Said I was their prize. Said when they were done with me, they would sell me to Comancheros down south." Jacob's jaw clenched hard enough that he felt his teeth grind. "Did they hurt you?" Nelini met his eyes without flinching. "They tried to break me. They did not succeed." There was steel in her voice, a core of strength that all the cruelty in the world had not been able to bend. Jacob found himself respecting this woman, this stranger he had pulled from the edge of death. "You are strong," he said simply. "I had no choice," Nelini replied. "The weak do not survive what I survived." Jacob pulled strips of jerky and hardtack from his pack and offered them to her. She ate slowly, mechanically, her eyes never leaving the fire. He could see her gathering herself, rebuilding the walls that trauma had shattered. "This is not exactly 5-star dining," Jacob said, attempting a smile. "But it beats starving." Nelini looked at him, confusion crossing her face at the attempt at humor. Jacob felt suddenly awkward, the way he always did when he tried to act like a normal human being instead of the half-wild hermit he had become. "My wife used to say I had a bear's sense of humor," he explained. "Gruff and clumsy." For the first time since he had found her, Nelini's lips twitched in something that might have been the ghost of a smile. "Your wife was wise." "Yes," Jacob agreed. "She was." They sat in silence for a while, the fire crackling between them, the only sound the distant whisper of wind through the pines outside. Finally, Nelini spoke again. "Your wife was Apache?" Jacob nodded. "Aasha, Mescalero. I met her when I was 22, scouting for the army near Tularosa." "You were army?" There was surprise in Nelini's voice, but no judgment. "Was," Jacob emphasized. "Left after I saw what they did, what they wanted me to be part of." His voice went hard. "I could not be part of that. Would not." Nelini studied him with new interest. "You gave up the white man's world for an Apache woman?" "Gave up nothing," Jacob said firmly. "Gained everything. 15 years of everything." He paused, the familiar ache settling in his chest. "She passed 2 winters ago. Fever took her fast. Nothing the medicine could do." Nelini reached out, her hand trembling slightly, and touched his arm. It was brief, barely a second, but the gesture carried the weight of understanding, of shared grief. of recognition between two people who had both lost the world they knew. "I am sorry," she said softly. Jacob nodded his thanks and changed the subject, uncomfortable with sympathy. "You need rest. In the morning, I will take you to the nearest settlement, get you to a doctor, report what happened to the law." Nelini's eyes went sharp. "No, not Silver Ridge." Jacob frowned. "It is the closest town. 2 days' ride." "The law is them," Nelini said, her voice carrying absolute certainty. "Mayor Samuel Redding paid Jessup to do this." Jacob went very still. "How do you know that?" "I listened," Nelini said simply. 9 days they kept me. They thought I was broken, that I heard nothing, understood nothing. But I watched. I listened. Every night, Jessup talked about Samuel and the railroad deal, about clearing the Apache from the sacred springs, about $50,000. She leaned forward, intensity burning in her eyes. "They are planning something bigger, and I am just a loose end they need to tie up." Jacob felt pieces clicking into place in his mind. The Apache lands near the sacred springs had been disputed territory for years, with the railroad companies eager to lay track through the mountain passes. If Mayor Redding was in league with outlaws to drive the Apache out, to eliminate anyone who could contest the land claims, then this was bigger than one woman's suffering. This was attempted genocide wrapped in legal paperwork. "You stayed alert," Jacob said slowly, respect coloring his words. "Stayed smart, even when they tried to break you." "My mother taught me to survive," Nelini said. "To watch, to wait for the right moment." "Looks like that moment was when I showed up," Jacob said, a hint of his dry humor returning. Nelini's eyes softened slightly. "Perhaps. Or perhaps you showing up was the right moment the spirit sent." As dawn began to break outside the cave, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Jacob checked his rifle and began reloading. Nelini watched him work, and something shifted in her expression. A decision being made. "Teach me to shoot that," she said. Jacob looked up, surprised. "You know how to shoot?" "I know the bow," Nelini said. "Rifle is different, but I learn fast." Jacob considered her for a long moment. She could barely walk. She had been through 9 days of hell that would have broken most men, let alone a woman half-starved and exhausted. But there was something in her eyes that reminded him of Aasha, a refusal to be victim, a determination to be warrior. "All right," he said, and showed her how to hold the rifle, how to sight down the barrel, how to control her breathing before the shot. Her hands, despite their weakness, were steady, her focus absolute. "Natural," Jacob observed. Nelini lowered the rifle and looked at him directly. "Jacob Mackenzie, why did you really help me? Not just because of a promise to your dead wife." The question hung in the air between them. Jacob could have lied, could have deflected. Instead, he found himself telling the truth. 17 years ago, I was dying in the desert south of here. Took an arrow in a skirmish, got separated from my unit. I crawled for 3 days before I could not crawl anymore." He paused, remembering. "Your people found me. They did not have to help. Many would have said I was the enemy. Let the desert take me. But they did not. One woman especially." He met Nelini's eyes. "Aasha. She nursed me back to health, taught me your language, your ways, gave me a life worth living." "So you owe a debt," Nelini said. "More than a debt," Jacob replied. "You asked why I really helped. Truth is, I have a good heart, buried under all this fur and bad humor. Your people showed me that. Aasha showed me that. And when I heard you scream this morning, I knew I could not walk away. Not from this. Not from you." Nelini held his gaze for a long moment, something passing between them that had no name but was real nonetheless. Understanding. Alliance. The beginning of trust. "Thank you," she said finally. "Do not thank me yet," Jacob said. "Those men will be hunting us. And if what you say about the mayor is true, we have bigger problems than just outlaws." As if summoned by his words, a sound drifted through the morning air. Horses, multiple riders, and they were getting closer. Jacob moved to the cave entrance and carefully peered out. In the distance, perhaps 3 miles down the canyon, he could see smoke signals rising. Not Apache signals. These were crude, white man's signals. But their message was clear. They were organizing. They were hunting. He turned back to Nelini. "They are coming. 12 men, maybe 15 by the look of those signals." Nelini struggled to her feet, using the cave wall for support. Her legs shook, but she stood. "Then we cannot run." "You can barely walk," Jacob pointed out. "Then teach me to fight while I heal," Nelini said. Her voice was steady, final. "You said you owe a debt. I am calling it due. Teach me to hunt the men who murdered my family." Jacob looked at this woman, this stranger who had become something more in the space of a few hours. She was asking him to do what he had avoided for 2 years, to stop hiding, to stop grieving, to step back into the world and all its violence and pain. But some promises, he thought again, are worth keeping, even when they cost you everything. "All right," he said quietly. "But we do this smart, not angry, smart." "Smart," Nelini agreed. Outside, the sun climbed higher into the New Mexico sky, painting the mountains in shades of amber and gold. Somewhere in the distance, William Jessup and his men were organizing their hunt, confident that one mountain man and one half-dead Apache woman would be easy prey. They had no idea what was coming for them. Jacob handed Nelini the rifle and began teaching her the fundamentals, his voice calm and patient, despite the danger closing in around them. And as he watched her learn, watched the determination in her eyes sharpen into something harder and more focused, he realized that perhaps this was what Aasha had meant. Perhaps this was the promise she had asked him to keep. Not just to help, but to stand, to fight, to refuse to let the darkness win. The hunt was about to begin, and this time, the prey would become the hunters. 3 days passed in the high country, and in those 3 days, Nelini Ashwood learned what it meant to be a hunter instead of prey. The sun rose on the 4th morning to find them on a ridge overlooking Copper Creek, a small tributary that fed into the Rio Grande 20 miles south. Jacob had spent the previous days teaching Nelini the fundamentals of survival and combat, and he had been surprised, though he tried not to show it, at how quickly she absorbed every lesson. Her Apache upbringing had given her a foundation that most white women would never possess. She knew how to move silently through brush, how to read the subtle signs of disturbed earth and broken twigs, how to use terrain to mask her presence. What Jacob taught her was how to apply those skills not to hunting deer and rabbit, but to hunting men. "Breathe out slowly," Jacob instructed, his voice barely above a whisper. "Let half the air leave your lungs. Hold, then squeeze." Nelini lay prone on the rocky outcrop, Jacob's rifle nestled against her shoulder. 50 yards below, a tin can sat balanced on a fallen log. She followed his instructions precisely, her breathing controlled, her body still as stone. The rifle cracked, and the can flew backward, spinning through the air. Jacob allowed himself a small smile. Good. Very good. Nelini sat up, working the lever action to eject the spent cartridge. Her hands, which had trembled with weakness just days ago, now moved with growing confidence. "My father taught me to shoot," she said, "but he never taught me to shoot at distance, always close, for protection." "Distance gives you options," Jacob said, taking the rifle and reloading it. "Lets you control when and where the fight happens. That is the difference between defending and winning." They had been careful these past 3 days, moving camp each night, using every trick Jacob knew to mask their trail. But he knew it was only a matter of time before Jessup's men picked up their scent. The outlaws had numbers and local knowledge. What Jacob and Nelini had was skill and desperation, and sometimes that was enough. Below them, in the creek bottom, Jacob spotted movement. 2 horses drinking from the clear water, and beside them, 2 men. He recognized them immediately. The shorter one wore a battered cavalry hat, probably stolen. The taller one had a limp, favoring his left leg. They were part of Jessup's gang, Jacob was certain, and they were alone, separated from the main group. "We should avoid them," Jacob said automatically, his instinct still to hide, to survive by staying invisible. Nelini shook her head. "No, we take their horses, their guns. Send a message." Jacob looked at her sharply. In 3 days, something had changed in Nelini Ashwood. The frightened, broken woman he had pulled from that post was gone, replaced by someone harder, someone dangerous. He should have been worried by the transformation, but instead, he found himself respecting it. The world had tried to destroy her. She had chosen to destroy it back. "All right," he said slowly, "but we do it my way. Quiet. Controlled." "Your way," Nelini agreed. They spent 10 minutes planning the approach. Jacob would circle behind, coming from the upstream side where the sound of rushing water would mask any noise. Nelini would create a distraction from the eastern ridge, drawing the men's attention long enough for Jacob to get into position. It was a simple plan. Sometimes simple was best. Nelini waited until Jacob had disappeared into the trees, counting heartbeats the way he had taught her. When enough time had passed, she picked up a fist-sized rock and hurled it into the brush 30 yards to her left. It crashed through the undergrowth with all the subtlety of a charging elk. Both men below spun toward the sound, hands dropping to their pistols. "What was that?" the shorter one hissed. "Probably just a deer," the taller one replied, but his voice carried uncertainty. "Go check," the short one ordered. As the tall man limped toward the brush, Jacob emerged from the creek like a spirit rising from water. He moved behind the shorter outlaw with the fluid grace of a hunting cat, and before the man could turn, Jacob's rifle butt connected with the back of his skull. The outlaw dropped without a sound. The tall man heard the thump of his companion hitting the ground and wheeled around, his hand fumbling for his gun. Nelini's rifle cracked from the ridge above. The bullet took the man in the shoulder, spinning him sideways. He went down screaming, clutching the wound. Jacob was on him in seconds, kicking the fallen pistol away, his own rifle trained on the wounded outlaw's face. "Quiet," he commanded, "or the next shot goes through your head instead of your shoulder." The man went silent, his face pale with shock and pain. Nelini climbed down from the ridge, moving more confidently now that regular food and rest had restored some of her strength. She looked at the wounded man with eyes that held no mercy, no compassion. "I know you," she said quietly. You were there, at the camp. You laughed when they hurt me." The outlaw's eyes widened with recognition and fear. "Nelini," Jacob said, a warning in his voice. He could see what she was thinking, could see the cold fury building behind her eyes. "We are not murderers." "Why not?" Nelini turned to face him, and Jacob saw something in her expression that troubled him deeply. "They murdered my parents. They would have murdered me. Why should they receive mercy they never showed?" It was a fair question, a just question even, and Jacob had no easy answer for it. "Because once you start down that road," he said finally, "you become what they are. And I promise to help you survive, not to help you lose your soul." They stared at each other across the wounded outlaw, a battle of wills playing out in silence. Finally, Nelini looked away. "Fine, we question him, then we let him go." Jacob nodded and turned his attention to the wounded man. "Where is Jessup's main camp?" The outlaw spat blood. "Go to hell, mountain man." Jacob pressed the muzzle of his rifle against the man's wounded shoulder, not hard, just enough to send fresh waves of agony through damaged flesh. The outlaw screamed. "I will ask once more," Jacob said, his voice calm and cold. "Where is the camp?" "Dead Horse Canyon," the man gasped. 8 miles north. Started with a dozen when they took the girl, but Jessup's been recruiting hard. Last I counted, near 20 men in camp. Maybe more coming." "Why?" Nelini demanded. "Why does he need more men?" The outlaw laughed, a wet, bubbling sound. "You stupid squaw. This ain't just about you. Jessup's got big plans. Him and the mayor. They are going to hit your people at the sacred springs, burn them out, make it look like renegades did it. Then the army comes, cleans up the mess, and the land is free and clear for the railroad." Jacob felt ice settle in his stomach. This was worse than he had imagined. Not just murder, not just land theft. Genocide with a legal veneer. "When?" he asked. 3 days, the outlaw said. "Survey team is already in Silver Ridge. Soon as they sign off on the route, Jessup makes his move." Nelini's face had gone pale. "Uncle Dakota," she whispered. "The children. They will massacre everyone." Jacob made a decision. He stripped both outlaws of their weapons, their ammunition, their boots. Then he tied them securely to a tree, using knots that would take hours to work free. "You are letting us live?" the wounded man asked, disbelief in his voice. "Letting you live," Jacob agreed. "So you can carry a message back to Jessup. Tell him the mountains have eyes. Tell him ghosts are hunting him. Tell him to be afraid." "He ain't afraid of nothing," the outlaw spat. Jacob leaned close, his face inches from the man's. "Then he is a fool, because we are coming. And we will not stop until every man who hurt this woman is in the ground or in chains." They took the horses and rode hard, putting distance between themselves and the tied outlaws. By the time the men worked free and stumbled back to camp on bare feet, Jacob and Nelini would be miles away. That evening, they made camp in a sheltered hollow ringed by ponderosa pines. Jacob built a small fire, keeping it low and smoky to minimize detection. They ate jerky and hardtack in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. Finally, Nelini spoke. "You could have let me kill him." "Yes," Jacob agreed, "but you did not." "No." "Why?" Nelini turned to face him across the fire. "You think I am weak? That I cannot do what is necessary?" Jacob shook his head. "I think you are one of the strongest people I have ever met. That is why I stopped you. Because killing him would not have been necessary. It would have been revenge. And revenge makes you predictable, makes you controllable. I need you thinking clearly, not drowning in anger. Nelini was quiet for a long moment, staring into the flames. "The anger is all I have left," she said finally. "It kept me alive when they chained me. Why should I let it go now?" "You should not let it go," Jacob said. "Use it. Channel it. But do not let it use you. There is a difference between a warrior and a killer, Nelini. A warrior fights for something. A killer just destroys." She looked at him with eyes that held too much pain for someone so young. "You speak from experience." It was not a question. Jacob nodded slowly. "I have killed men, more than I care to count. Some deserved it. Some probably did not. For a long time, I thought the killing made me strong, made me a survivor." He paused, remembering. "Then I met Aasha, and she taught me that real strength is knowing when not to pull the trigger." "Your wife was wise," Nelini said. Nelini was quiet for a long moment, absorbing this. Aasha must have been remarkable, to change a man's whole philosophy. "She was," Jacob said, his voice soft with old grief and older love. "Took me years to understand what she was trying to teach me. That the hardest thing a warrior can do is choose mercy." "She was," Jacob agreed, "and she would tell you the same thing I am telling you now. Do not throw away who you are to hurt who hurt you. Because then they win. They take not just your freedom, but your soul." Nelini drew her knees to her chest, wrapping her arms around them. For a moment she looked very young, very vulnerable. "I am scared," she admitted quietly. "Scared of what I am becoming. Scared of how easy it was to want him dead." Jacob moved around the fire and sat beside her, close enough to offer comfort, but not so close as to crowd. "That fear is good," he said. "It means you are still human, still capable of being more than what they tried to make you." They sat together in silence, watching the fire burn down to embers. Above them, the stars emerged one by one, diamond bright in the mountain darkness. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called, hunting through the night. "Tell me about her," Nelini said suddenly. "About Aasha. How did you meet?" Jacob smiled, remembering. "I was 22, stupid, thought I knew everything. The army had sent me to scout near Tularosa, looking for Apache camps. I got separated from my unit, took an arrow in a skirmish." He touched his right arm, where the scar still showed pale against tanned skin. "I crawled for 3 days, finally collapsed near a water hole." "And she found you," Nelini prompted. "She found me," Jacob confirmed. "Could have left me to die. Should have, probably. I was the enemy, after all. But she did not. She dragged me back to her camp, cleaned my wound, fed me, kept me alive." His voice went soft with memory. "And when I was strong enough to understand, she taught me. Your language, your customs, the right way to live in these mountains." "You fell in love," Nelini said. "Fell like a stone down a well," Jacob agreed, a hint of humor in his voice. "Deep and fast and permanent. We were married that autumn. 15 years we had together. 15 years of learning that family is not just blood, it is choice, and I chose her every day." "She would be proud of you," Nelini said. "Keeping your promise, helping me." Jacob looked at her, this woman he had known for less than a week but who somehow felt like kin. "I hope so," he said simply. The next morning brought new urgency. They had 3 days, maybe less, before Jessup's raid on the sacred springs. 3 days to warn the Mescalero, to gather allies, to find a way to stop a massacre. "We need help," Jacob said as they broke camp. "We cannot fight 15 men alone." "Who would help us?" Nelini asked. You said yourself the law is corrupt. Not all law, Jacob replied. There is a federal marshal, Henry Caldwell. He rides circuit through these territories. I scouted for him years ago. He is a hard man, but a fair one. Where do we find him? Last I heard, he was working out of a camp near Tres Piedras. 2 days' ride if we push hard. They rode through country that grew progressively more beautiful and more dangerous. The mountains here were younger, sharper, their peaks still jagged from the forces that had thrust them skyward. Streams ran clear and cold, fed by snowmelt from the high passes. Deer watched them pass with liquid eyes, unafraid. As they rode, Nelini began to sing. It was an Apache traveling song, soft and rhythmic, meant to mark the passage of miles and keep the spirits of the trail friendly. Jacob found himself joining in, his voice rough but true, harmonizing with hers in a way that felt natural, right. When the song ended, Nelini looked at him with something like wonder. You know our songs. Aasha taught me many things, Jacob said. Music was one of them. Said it kept the loneliness away. Does it? Nelini asked. Keep the loneliness away? Jacob considered the question honestly. Sometimes, when I let it. They reached Marshal Caldwell's circuit camp at sunset on the second day. It was a temporary affair, a collection of tents and wagons set up in a meadow surrounded by aspen trees. A dozen horses were picketed nearby, and the smell of cooking meat drifted on the evening air. Caldwell himself was exactly as Jacob remembered, tall, lean, with iron-gray hair and eyes the color of winter ice. He looked up from the map he was studying as Jacob and Nelini rode into camp, and recognition flickered across his weathered face. "Jacob Mackenzie," he said, his voice carrying the accent of somewhere far east, perhaps Boston or Philadelphia. "Heard you had gone native and disappeared into the mountains. Figured the bears had gotten you by now." "Bears tried," Jacob said, dismounting. "I was not cooperative." Caldwell's eyes shifted to Nelini, taking in her torn dress, the healing wounds on her wrists, the rifle she carried with comfortable familiarity. "And who is this?" "Nelini Ashwood," Jacob said. "And before you ask about the wanted poster, you should know it is a lie." Caldwell's expression hardened. "Funny you should mention that. Mayor Redding sent word 3 days ago. Said there is an Apache woman, dangerous, killed 2 of his deputies. $500 reward." Nelini stiffened in her saddle, but Jacob stepped forward. "Marshal, I have known you 10 years. You know I do not run with killers. This woman is a victim, not a criminal." "That is a serious accusation against a sitting mayor," Caldwell said carefully. "You have proof?" "Working on it," Jacob admitted. "But if you do not help us, innocent people are going to die. A lot of them." Over the next hour, sitting by Caldwell's campfire, Jacob and Nelini laid out everything they knew. The murder of Nelini's parents, her captivity, the conspiracy between Mayor Redding and William Jessup, the planned raid on the Sacred Springs, the railroad deal worth $50,000. Caldwell listened without interruption, his face betraying nothing. When they finished, he was quiet for a long time, staring into the fire. "I believe you," he said finally, "or at least, I believe you believe it. But I cannot arrest a mayor on hearsay and the word of a wanted woman. I need evidence, documents, witnesses." "We have 3 days," Jacob said urgently, "maybe less." "Then you better find me that evidence in 3 days," Caldwell replied. His voice softened slightly. "Jacob, you know I want to help, but I am bound by law. Bring me something I can use in court, and I will bring the full weight of federal authority down on Redding and Jessup both. But until then, My hands are tied." Jacob wanted to argue, to rage against the injustice of it. But he knew Caldwell was right. Justice, real justice, required more than just righteous anger. It required proof. "There is someone who can help," Nelini said suddenly. "Uncle Takoda. He is an elder of our people. He will know what to do." And so they rode again, leaving Caldwell's camp behind, heading deeper into the mountains toward the Mescalero lands. As they traveled, Jacob found himself thinking about family, about duty, about the promises we make and the prices we pay to keep them. Somewhere behind them, William Jessup and his men were hunting. Somewhere ahead, a village full of innocent people faced extinction. And caught in between were two people who had every reason to run, to hide, to save themselves. But some battles, Jacob reflected, cannot be won by running. Some battles must be fought, no matter the cost. The sacred springs lay 3 days ahead, and the clock was ticking. The Mescalero camp sat in a valley, protected on 3 sides by sheer rock walls, with only a narrow entrance through which riders could pass single file. It was a defensive position chosen by generations of Apache who understood that survival often meant being able to see your enemies coming. Jacob and Nelini approached at dusk, when the cooking fires were being lit and the smell of roasting meat drifted on the evening air. Children played near the wickiups, their laughter high and bright, innocent of the danger gathering like storm clouds on the horizon. Women ground corn and tended fires, while men worked on weapons and tack, preparing for the autumn hunt. It looked, Jacob thought, like peace, like safety, like a world that had forgotten how fragile such things could be. A young warrior stepped out to meet them as they rode through the entrance, his hand resting on the knife at his belt. His eyes widened when he recognized Nelini. "Morning Star," he breathed, using her Apache name. "You are alive. We thought you were dead." Nelini slid from her horse, and immediately she was surrounded by people. Children rushed to touch her hands, their faces lit with joy. Women embraced her, tears streaming down weathered cheeks. The reunion was loud, chaotic, filled with the kind of emotion that comes when someone returns from the dead. Through the crowd came an old man, walking with the careful dignity of someone whose joints had seen too many winters. He was perhaps 67, with hair gone white as snow, and a face carved into deep lines by sun and wind and sorrow. But his eyes were sharp, bright with intelligence and something deeper. Wisdom, perhaps, or simply the knowledge that comes from outliving most of your friends. "Uncle Takoda," Nelini said, and her voice broke on the words. Takoda, who was called Red Skywalker by his people, opened his arms, and she went to him like a child seeking shelter. He held her while she wept, the first real tears Jacob had seen her shed. All the strength, all the steel she had shown these past days, finally cracked in the presence of someone who represented safety, family, home. Jacob remained mounted, giving them privacy. He understood this moment, had lived it himself when Aasha died, and he had no one to hold him while the grief tore him apart. Finally, Takoda looked up and saw Jacob. Recognition dawned in the old man's eyes, followed by something that might have been approval. "Jacob Mackenzie," he said in English accented but clear. "Husband of Aasha of the Red Paint People. You have been gone from us too long." Jacob dismounted and approached, pulling a pouch of tobacco from his saddlebag. He offered it with both hands, the formal Apache greeting for an elder. Red Skywalker, I come seeking your wisdom and your help. Dakota took the tobacco with a nod and gestured toward the largest wickiup at the center of camp. Come, we will talk, and you will tell me why Morningstar returns from the dead with eyes that have seen too much darkness. Inside the wickiup, a small fire burned in a pit lined with stones. The smoke rose through an opening in the roof, carrying prayers to the spirits above. Jacob and Nelini sat across from Dakota, while the old man prepared tea from herbs he kept in leather pouches. Your niece has been through hell, Jacob said quietly, and worse is coming if we do not act. Dakota handed them each a cup of tea, then settled himself cross-legged on a blanket woven in traditional patterns. Speak, he commanded. I will listen. Nelini told her story again, but this time the telling was different. She spoke in Apache, the words flowing faster, more naturally than they had in English. Jacob understood most of it, his years with Aasha having given him fluency in the language, if not perfect pronunciation. He heard the rage in Nelini's voice when she described her captivity, heard the steel when she spoke of survival, heard the fear when she explained Jessup's plan for the sacred springs. When she finished, Dakota was silent for a long time. He sipped his tea and stared into the fire, reading meanings in the flames that Jacob could only guess at. I believe you, the old man said finally. I have suspected for many moons that the white leaders in Silver Ridge were not to be trusted. Too many promises broken, too many agreements forgotten. He looked at Jacob. But our young warriors will want to fight now, to ride against Jessup and his men, to spill blood for blood. That is exactly what the whites want. It gives them excuse to call in the army, to say we are savages who cannot be reasoned with. That is why we need a different approach, Jacob said. We need evidence, proof of the conspiracy, something that will make the federal law step in before Jessup can act. What kind of proof? Dakota asked. Documents, Jacob replied. Land deeds, letters, anything that shows Redding and Jessup working together to steal Apache land. Nelini leaned forward. There is a man in Silver Ridge who might help. Doc Patterson. He treated my cousin last winter when he broke his leg. He was kind, fair, not like the others. Dakota nodded slowly. I remember this man. Yes, he has a good heart. He paused, considering. But Silver Ridge is dangerous for you, Morningstar. They have put a price on your head. Then Jacob will go alone, Nelini said. No, Jacob and Dakota said simultaneously. Jacob continued. We are partners in this. I do not leave you behind. Partners, Nelini repeated, and something passed between them. An acknowledgement. A bond forged in shared danger and shared purpose. Jacob saw Dakota notice it, saw the old man's eyes narrow slightly as he evaluated what was growing between the mountain man and his niece. If you go to Silver Ridge together, Dakota said carefully, you must be very careful, very smart. The mayor has eyes everywhere. I know someone who can help, Nelini said. Rosa Martinez. She owns the cantina on the edge of town. She knew my mother. She will hide us. They spent the rest of the evening planning. Dakota would keep the young warriors calm, would prepare the camp for possible evacuation if the worst happened. Jacob and Nelini would ride to Silver Ridge under cover of darkness, contact Doc Patterson, and attempt to gather the evidence they needed. Before they left the wickiup, Dakota performed a brief ceremony, painting symbols on their hands with clay mixed with sacred herbs. He chanted in Apache, too old and formal for Jacob to fully understand, calling on the spirits to protect them, to guide their steps, to bring them back safely. When he finished, He placed something in Nelini's hands. It was a necklace of turquoise and silver, the stones polished smooth by generations of wear. "Your mother's," Dakota said softly. "I kept it safe, hoping one day to give it to you. It carries her spirit, her strength. Wear it, and remember you are not alone." Nelini pressed the necklace to her chest, fresh tears standing in her eyes. "Thank you, Uncle." Dakota turned to Jacob and pressed something into his palm as well. An eagle feather, the shaft wrapped in red thread. "For the man who keeps his promises," the old man said. "May you fly swift and strike true." Outside, the camp had settled into evening routines. Children had been called in for the night. Warriors sat around fires, telling stories and checking weapons. Women sang lullabies to infants, their voices soft and sweet in the darkness. Jacob looked at it all and felt the weight of what was at stake. These people, living their lives, trusting that tomorrow would come. They had no idea that 3 days from now, men with guns and fire might come screaming through that narrow entrance, bringing death and destruction. Unless he and Nelini could stop it. "We should rest," Jacob said quietly. "Leave before dawn. Cover as much ground as we can before the sun gets high." Nelini nodded, but she did not move. She stood looking at the camp, her mother's necklace clasped in her hands. "They are all that is left of my family," she said. "These people, this place. If Jessup destroys this, he destroys the last piece of who I was." "Then we will not let him destroy it," Jacob said simply. They were given a wiki-up to share, which would have been scandalous in white society, but was perfectly acceptable among the Apache. Nelini was unmarried, Jacob was widowed, and they were facing danger together. The people understood that survival sometimes required unconventional arrangements. Inside, they laid out their bedrolls on opposite sides of the small fire. The silence between them was comfortable now, familiar. So much had changed in just a week. Jacob found himself thinking about how Nelini had gone from stranger to ally to something he could not quite name. Not family exactly, not yet, but something close to it. "Can I ask you something?" Nelini said into the darkness. "Of course." "Do you think I have changed? Become something different than I was?" Jacob considered the question carefully. "Yes," he said honestly. "You have changed. But change is not always bad. The woman I pulled from that post was broken, hurt. The woman sitting across this fire from me is a warrior, strong, capable. I would rather have you at my back than half the men I served with in the army." "But am I still good?" Nelini asked. The vulnerability in her voice made Jacob's chest ache. "Or have I become just another killer?" "You have not killed anyone yet," Jacob pointed out gently. "But I wanted to," Nelini whispered. "When we had those men at the creek, I wanted them dead so badly I could taste it." Jacob sat up, looking at her across the fire. Wanting something and doing it are different. You chose mercy. Even when your anger was screaming for blood, you chose to be better. That is what makes you good, Nelini. Not the absence of darkness, but the choice to stand in the light anyway. She was quiet for a long moment. Then, "You're Aasha. She would want you to live again, to be happy, not to spend the rest of your days alone in the mountains." It was the second time she had said something like that. Jacob felt his throat tighten. "Maybe," he admitted. "But first, we keep you alive. Keep your people safe. Everything else is noise until that is done." Nelini crossed the space between them and took his hand. Not romantically, not sexually. Just a gesture of connection, of thanks, of understanding between two people who had been broken by loss and were slowly learning how to be whole again. "Thank you," she said, "for everything." Jacob squeezed her hand gently, then released it. "Get some sleep. Tomorrow, things get dangerous." They left the Mescalero camp 3 hours before dawn, riding through darkness so complete that Jacob had to trust his horse to find the trail. Beside him, Nelini rode in silence, her mother's necklace glinting faintly in the starlight. The ride to Silver Ridge took most of the day. They approached the town from the south, using the hills and arroyos to mask their approach. As the buildings came into view, Jacob felt his stomach tighten. He had not been in a town, any town, for 2 years. Too many people, too much noise, too many memories of a world he had left behind. But some things mattered more than comfort. They waited until full dark before slipping into the outskirts of Silver Ridge. The town was bigger than Jacob remembered, grown fat on railroad money and mining claims. New buildings lined the main street, their false fronts painted in garish colors. Saloons spilled drunken miners onto the wooden sidewalks. A piano jangled somewhere, playing a tune Jacob did not recognize. Rosa's Cantina sat on the eastern edge of town, a squat adobe building that looked like it had been there since before anyone called this place Silver Ridge. A sign above the door read La Estrella in faded paint. Jacob tied the horses behind the building, in shadows where casual eyes would not spot them. Then he and Nelini, with her face hidden beneath a Mexican shawl Rosa had apparently left for them, slipped through the back door. Inside, the cantina smelled of chili peppers and tobacco smoke. A handful of men sat at tables, drinking and playing cards. Behind the bar stood a woman of perhaps 40, with dark hair going gray at the temples and eyes that missed nothing. Rosa Martinez took one look at Nelini, and her face transformed. Joy, relief, and anger all warred for dominance. She came around the bar in a rush and pulled Nelini into a crushing embrace. "Stupid girl," she hissed in Spanish. "We thought you were dead. Your mother, God rest her soul, she would haunt me forever if I let something happen to you." "I am sorry, Tia Rosa," Nelini replied in the same language. "I did not mean to worry you." Rosa pulled back, studying Nelini's face. Then her eyes shifted to Jacob, evaluating him with the sharp gaze of a woman who had spent decades reading people's intentions. "You must be the mountain man," she said in accented English. "The one who saved her." "Jacob Mackenzie, ma'am." "Rosa Martinez. And do not call me ma'am. Makes me feel old." She gestured toward a door behind the bar. "Come, quickly, before someone sees." She led them down a narrow staircase into a cellar that smelled of earth and stored food. Barrels lined the walls, along with sacks of flour and beans. At the far end was a small space with blankets and a lantern. "You can hide here," Rosa said, "but you cannot stay long. The mayor has men watching. They come in every night asking questions, looking for you." She pointed at Nelini. "There is a reward, $500. Some men would sell their mothers for less." "We need to contact Doc Patterson," Jacob said. "Can you get a message to him?" Rosa nodded. "Doc comes every morning to check on my father. He has the arthritis, cannot walk so good. I will tell Doc you are here." "Thank you," Nelini said. "Do not thank me yet," Rosa replied. "Thank me when you are both still breathing." She left them in the cellar, promising to bring food and water. Alone in the dim lantern light, Jacob and Nelini settled in to wait. The hours passed slowly. Above them, they could hear the muffled sounds of the cantina, boots on wooden floors, laughter, arguments, the piano playing its endless, jangling songs. Near midnight, the cellar door opened, and a man descended the stairs. He was perhaps 48, with thinning hair and the careful hands of someone who made his living through precision. Doc Patterson carried a black medical bag in one hand and a rolled bundle of papers in the other. "Jacob Mackenzie," he said, his voice carrying the neutral tone of someone who had learned to hide his thoughts. "I heard you were dead. The stories said a bear got you." "Bears tried," Jacob said, echoing his words to Marshal Caldwell. "I was not cooperative." Doc turned his attention to Nelini. "And you must be the young woman everyone in town thinks is a murderer." "I have not murdered anyone," Nelini said quietly. "I did not think you had," Doc replied. He set his bag down and unrolled the papers on top of a barrel. "I am also the county clerk, which means I see every land deed, every contract, every official document that passes through Silver Ridge, and I have been seeing some very interesting documents lately." Jacob and Nelini moved closer, studying the papers by lantern light. There were deeds, contracts, survey maps, and in every one, Jacob could see the evidence of conspiracy. Forged signatures, backdated sales, Apache land transferred to shell companies, which in turn sold the land to railroad interests for pennies on the acre. And overseeing it all, coordinating the deals, taking his cut, was Mayor Samuel Redding. "This is it," Jacob breathed. "This is the proof we need." "I've been making copies," Doc said, "hiding them, waiting for someone to do something about this corruption." He looked at them both. "I take it you are the someones?" "We are trying to be," Nelini said. Doc nodded. "Then take these copies. Get them to Marshal Caldwell. He is the only law in this territory that Redding cannot buy. But you need to move fast. The railroad survey team is already here. Once they sign off on the route, Jessup will move against your people." He paused. "And Jessup does not leave witnesses." As if summoned by the mention of his name, heavy footsteps sounded on the stairs. All three of them froze. Doc quickly rolled up the papers and shoved them into Jacob's hands. "Hide," he hissed. But there was nowhere to hide. The cellar was open, exposed. Whoever was coming down those stairs would see them immediately. The door at the top of the stairs opened, and a young man in a deputy's badge descended. He was perhaps 19, with a face still soft with youth, but eyes that held uncertainty, moral conflict. Tom Ashford stopped when he saw them, his hand dropping to the pistol at his hip. For a long moment, no one moved. No one breathed. Then Tom's hand moved away from his gun. "Doc," he said carefully, "you treatin' someone down here?" Doc Patterson's face remained neutral. "Just checking on Rose's stores, making sure nothing is spoiled." Tom looked at Jacob, at Nelini, at the papers partially visible in Jacob's hand. The young deputy's face worked through a dozen emotions before settling on something like resolve. "My pa taught me right from wrong," Tom said quietly. "What the mayor is doing, what Jessup is planning, that ain't right. I do not care what the wanted posters say." He pulled his badge from his vest and looked at it for a moment. Then he pinned it back in place. "I want to help," he said. "Tell me how." Jacob studied the young man's face, looking for deception, for weakness. He found only determination. "Why?" he asked. "Why risk your job, maybe your life, for people you do not know?" "Because if I do not," Tom replied, "I will spend the rest of my life knowing I was a coward, and I would rather die standing than live on my knees." It was, Jacob thought, exactly the kind of thing a young man with courage would say. The kind of thing he himself had said once, long ago, when he chose to leave the army rather than participate in atrocity. "All right," Jacob said. "Then here is how you help." They spent the next hour planning. Tom would keep watch, would warn them if Jessup's men got too close. Doc would continue copying documents, building the case against Redding. Jacob and Nelini would take the evidence they had and ride hard for Marshal Caldwell's camp, bringing the law down on Silver Ridge before Jessup could attack the Sacred Springs. It was not a perfect plan, but it was the only plan they had. As they prepared to leave, slipping out through the cantina's back door into the darkness beyond, Jacob felt something shift in the air. A sense of pieces moving on a board, of forces gathering for collision. Somewhere in this town, William Jessup was planning murder. Somewhere, Mayor Redding was counting his blood money. Somewhere, innocent people slept, unaware that their lives hung by a thread. 2 had been found tied to trees, barefoot and babbling about ghosts in the mountains. 3 more had simply vanished, their horses returning to camp with empty saddles. The 6th had staggered into camp 2 days ago with an arrow through his shoulder and a message carved into the shaft in Apache symbols. "We are coming." Coyote Pete Hammond sat across the fire from Jessup, cleaning his pistol with methodical precision. He was 33, fast with a gun, and completely without conscience. He had killed his first man at 16 and had never looked back. "Boss," Pete said, his voice carrying the flat affect of someone discussing the weather, "the men are getting spooked. Half of them want to ride out tonight. Forget about the railroad money." Jessup's hand went to the scar that ran from his left temple to his jaw, a nervous habit he had developed over the years. The scar was a gift from an Apache warrior 10 years ago, back when Jessup had been a sergeant in the army. The warrior had given him the scar. Jessup had given the warrior a bullet. But the mark had never healed right, never faded. It was a constant reminder of everything he hated about these mountains and the people who called them home. "We are not running," Jessup said, his voice hard as flint. "We have a job to do. The mayor is paying us $50,000 to clear those Apache from the Sacred Springs. We do the job. We get paid. We disappear. Simple." "Ain't feeling so simple anymore," Pete observed. "Not with that mountain man picking us off." Jessup stood and walked to the edge of the camp, looking out over the darkened canyon. Somewhere out there in that vast darkness, Jacob Mackenzie was planning something. Jessup could feel it the way a man feels a storm coming, a pressure in the air, a change in the wind. "I want doubled guards tonight," Jessup commanded. "No one sleeps alone. No one wanders off to piss without a partner. And tomorrow, we move up the timeline. We cannot get to Marshal Caldwell and back in time, even if we ride through the night." Jacob knew she was right. They had perhaps 18 hours before Jessup's raid. Not enough time to bring the law. Not enough time to evacuate the Mescalero camp. Not enough time for anything except desperate measures. "We need to change the plan," he said quietly. "What plan?" Nelini asked. "We have no plan for this." Jacob was silent for a long moment, his mind working through possibilities, discarding options, searching for anything that might give them an advantage. Finally, an idea formed. It was dangerous, probably suicidal, but it was all he had. "We trap them," he said. "Make them come to us on ground we choose." "How?" Jacob turned to look at her, and in the moonlight He could see the trust in her eyes. She believed in him, believed he could find a way through this impossible situation. The weight of that trust was almost more than he could bear.
"There is an old Spanish mission 3 miles west of here," he said. "San Miguel de los Pinos. Been abandoned for 50 years, but the walls are still standing. Thick adobe, built to withstand Apache raids." He paused. "If we could lure Jessup there, away from his main force, we might have a chance." "How do we lure him?" Nelini asked. Jacob met her eyes. "With you. With the one thing he wants more than money. The proof that Apache have legal claim to the land." Nelini understood immediately. "You want to use me as bait." "Not as bait," Jacob corrected. "As a hunter who looks like prey. There is a difference." They spent the rest of the night planning, and when the sun rose over the canyon rim, they were already miles away, riding hard for the old mission. San Miguel de los Pinos stood in a small valley ringed by juniper and piñón pine. The mission church still stood, its bell tower crumbling but intact. The walls that had once surrounded the compound were mostly collapsed, but enough remained to provide cover and concealment. Jacob and Nelini spent the morning preparing their fortress. They positioned spare rifles at strategic points, loaded and ready. They filled canteens from the nearby spring, knowing that a siege could last hours. They studied every approach, every angle, every possible line of attack. And then they set the trap. Deputy Tom Ashford, who had left Silver Ridge before dawn on a fast horse, would be their messenger. He would ride to Jessup's camp with a simple story. The Apache woman was hiding at the old mission, wounded and alone. The mountain man had gone for help, leaving her vulnerable. It was a transparent lie. Jessup would know it was a trap. But Jacob was counting on something he had learned during his years in these mountains. Greed and hatred made men stupid, and Jessup had plenty of both. Tom returned just after noon, his horse lathered with sweat. "He is coming," the young deputy reported. "Took 10 men and left the rest to watch the main camp. Said he would bring back your head on a pike." "Cheerful fellow," Jacob observed dryly. They sent Tom away before Jessup arrived. The boy had helped enough, risked enough. This final confrontation was not his to fight. As the sun climbed toward its apex, Jacob and Nelini took their positions. As the sun climbed toward its apex, Jacob and Nelini climbed to the bell tower together. The original plan had been for Nelini to wait on the ground floor, visible bait to draw Jessup in. But she had refused. "We are partners," she had said simply. "We face this together." Jacob had not argued. He understood. After everything she had survived, she would not be bait again, would not play the helpless victim. If death was coming, she would meet it standing, armed, fighting. So they waited together in the tower, both armed, both ready. The waiting was always the hardest part. Jacob had learned that during the war, during the long campaigns against the Comanche, during every moment of his life when violence was coming but had not yet arrived. The anticipation was its own form of torture. Beside him on the stone floor of the bell tower, Nelini sat with her back against the wall, her rifle across her knees. She had insisted on being in the tower with him, rather than playing bait below. They had argued about it, quietly, urgently. But in the end, Jacob had relented. They were partners. They would face this together. "Are you scared?" Nelini asked quietly. "Terrified," Jacob admitted. "But some things are worth being terrified for." She looked at him, really looked at him, and something passed between them that had nothing to do with words. An understanding, a recognition, the acknowledgement that whatever happened in the next few hours, they had found something rare in each other,
Not love, exactly, not yet, but the possibility of it, the seed from which it might grow. "You're Aasha," Nelini said softly. "She would want you to live, to be happy again, to not spend the rest of your days alone." It was the third time she had said something like that, and this time Jacob did not deflect. "Maybe," he said. "But first, we survive this. Everything else can wait." Nelini reached out and took his hand. Her fingers were calloused from days of hard riding and harder living, but her grip was strong and sure. "When this is over," she said, "I want you to teach me more. Not just how to fight, but how to live in these mountains the way you do.
How to find peace in the wild places." "Why?" Jacob asked. "Because I am tired of being angry," Nelini admitted. "Tired of being broken. I want to learn how to be whole again." Before Jacob could respond, the sound of horses drifted up from the valley below. He released Nelini's hand and moved to the edge of the tower, peering carefully over the crumbling adobe. 10 riders approached the mission, spread out in a loose skirmish line. They moved cautiously, weapons drawn, eyes scanning for ambush. They were not fools, these men. They knew this was a trap. But they had come anyway, drawn by the promise of ending the chase, of silencing the woman who threatened their payday. At the center of the line rode William Jessup, his scarred face twisted into something that might have been a smile. Beside him, Coyote Pete sat easy in his saddle, his hand resting on his pistol. They stopped 50 yards from the mission, and Jessup called out in a voice that carried clearly in the thin mountain air, "Mackenzie, I know you are in there. Come out and face me like a man, instead of hiding like a coward." Jacob did not respond. Let them wonder. Let them guess. "I will make you a deal," Jessup continued. "Give me the girl and the documents, and I will let you ride away. You can go back to your mountains, back to your lonely little life. No one needs to die today." Still, Jacob said nothing. Jessup's face darkened with rage. "You think you are some kind of hero? You are just a washed-up army scout who could not hack it in the real world. You ran away and married a squaw and pretended you found something noble in the dirt." Jacob felt Nelini stiffen beside him, felt her anger rise. He put a calming hand on her arm. "Words," he whispered. "Just words. He is trying to provoke us into making a mistake." But Jessup was not finished. "I know about your wife, Mackenzie. Know she died, screaming, begging for help that never came. That is what happens to squaw lovers. That is what happens to traitors." The words hit like physical blows, and Jacob felt something cold and terrible unfold in his chest. Not rage, not quite. Something colder, more focused. The same feeling he had experienced years ago when he watched army officers order the slaughter of women and children at Sand Creek. The feeling that some men needed to be stopped, no matter the cost. "Nelini," he said quietly, "when I give the signal, I want you to run. Get out the back way, get on your horse, and ride for Marshal Caldwell. Do not look back. Do not wait for me." "No," Nelini said flatly. "We fight together, or not at all." "This is not about fighting together," Jacob said. "This is about one of us surviving to finish this, to make sure Jessup does not win." Before she could argue further, Jessup made his move. He signaled to his men, and they began advancing on the mission, weapons raised, spreading out to surround the building. Jacob took careful aim at the lead rider, a man with a cavalry hat and a rifle held at ready. He breathed out slowly, let half the air leave his lungs, and squeezed the trigger. The rifle cracked. The man toppled from his saddle. And suddenly the morning exploded into chaos. The outlaws returned fire immediately, bullets chipping adobe and whining through the air. Jacob worked the lever action on his rifle, firing, reloading, firing again, with the smooth efficiency of a man who had done this too many times to count. Beside him, Nelini added her fire to his, her shots less accurate but no less determined. Together they created a wall of lead that forced the attackers to scatter, to seek cover, to reconsider their casual approach. But there were too many of them. Jacob knew it. Nelini knew it. The outlaws knew it. It was only a matter of time. A bullet struck the adobe inches from Jacob's head, showering him with fragments. He rolled away, came up firing, saw one of his shots take an outlaw in the leg. The man went down screaming. "They're flanking us," Nelini called out. "East wall!" Jacob swung his rifle around and saw 3 men working their way through the rubble of the collapsed wall. He fired twice, forcing them back, but it was clear the defensive position was failing. They could not hold the tower against a determined assault from multiple directions. "Time to move," he said. "Fall back to the church." They scrambled down the narrow stone stairs, their boots loud on ancient steps. Behind them, they could hear the outlaws storming the tower, their shouts echoing in the confined space. The church interior was dim, lit only by shafts of sunlight through the broken roof. Jacob and Nelini took positions behind the massive wooden altar, using it as cover while they reloaded. "This is not going well," Nelini observed with dark humor. "No," Jacob agreed. "It is not." The front door burst open, and Coyote Pete stepped through, his pistol raised. But he was not looking at the altar. He was looking at the shadows to the left, where a pile of adobe bricks provided concealment, which meant he did not see Jacob until it was too late. Jacob's shot took Pete in the shoulder, spinning him around. The outlaw's pistol discharged into the ceiling as he fell, clutching his wound and cursing. But Pete's cry brought the others running. Suddenly the church was full of armed men, muzzle flashes lighting the darkness like hellish fireworks. Jacob grabbed Nelini's hand. "Run," he commanded. "Now." They burst through a side door into the blazing afternoon sun, running for the horses they had hidden in a grove of trees behind the mission. Bullets chased them, kicking up dust, splintering wood, singing past their heads with the sound of angry wasps. They reached the horses, and Nelini vaulted into her saddle with desperate speed. But as Jacob reached for his reins, he felt something punch him in the side, hard enough to knock the breath from his lungs. He looked down and saw blood spreading across his buckskin shirt. He had been shot. "Jacob!" Nelini's scream seemed to come from very far away. He tried to mount his horse, but his strength was failing, the world tilting sideways in a way that had nothing to do with the terrain. He felt himself falling, felt the ground rush up to meet him, felt Nelini's hands catching him before he could hit the dirt. "Leave me," he managed. "Ride. Get help." "No," Nelini said, and there was steel in her voice. "I told you, together or not at all." She somehow got him onto his horse, got herself mounted behind him, her arms wrapped around his waist to keep him upright. And then they were riding hard, with the sound of pursuit close behind and the smell of blood thick in Jacob's nostrils. As consciousness faded in and out like a guttering candle, Jacob's last coherent thought was that he had made a terrible mistake. He had promised to keep Nelini safe, and now, because of his wound, because of his weakness, he was going to get them both killed. The mountains blurred past, the sun hammered down,
And somewhere in the distance, growing closer with each passing second, came the thunder of hoofbeats and the promise of death. Nelini rode like fury itself had given her wings, one arm wrapped around Jacob's waist to keep him upright in the saddle, the other gripping the reins with white-knuckled desperation. Behind them, the sound of pursuit grew fainter as their horse, unburdened by two separate riders and driven by Nelini's Apache riding skills, opened distance on Jessup's men.
Jacob drifted in and out of consciousness, his breathing shallow and labored. Blood soaked through the makeshift bandage Nelini had wrapped around his midsection during a brief stop 2 miles back. The bullet had entered low on his right side, and though Nelini could not be certain without proper examination, she prayed it had missed anything vital. "Stay with me," she whispered against his ear, her voice fierce. "Stay with me, old man. You do not get to die. Not after everything." Jacob's response was a weak chuckle that turned into a cough. "Old? I am 39. "Then act like it," Nelini said, relief flooding through her at the sound of his voice, even weakened as it was. "Stay conscious. Talk to me." "About what?" "Anything. Tell me about the first time you saw these mountains." Jacob was quiet for a moment, gathering strength. "I was 22, he said finally. "Fresh from the east. Thought I knew everything. The army sent me west to scout, and the first time I saw the Sangre de Cristos at sunset, I understood how small I was, how big the world could be." His voice faded, and Nelini felt panic rise in her chest. "Jacob? Jacob, stay with me." "Still here," he murmured, "just tired." They rode through the afternoon and into the evening, pushing the horse to its limits. Nelini knew where she was going now, not to Marshal Caldwell's camp, which was too far for Jacob's failing strength. Not back to the Mescalero village, which Jessup would surely attack. To Silver Ridge, to Doc Patterson, to the one place where Jacob might receive the medical care that would save his life. It was the most dangerous choice, but it was the only choice. The sun was setting when they reached the outskirts of Silver Ridge, painting the sky in shades of orange and crimson that reminded Nelini of blood and fire. She guided the exhausted horse through back alleys, avoiding the main street, heading for Doc Patterson's office through routes she remembered from her childhood. Doc was closing his shutters when Nelini half-carried, half-dragged Jacob through his back door. The doctor took one look at Jacob's ashen face and blood-soaked shirt, and immediately cleared his examination table with a sweep of his arm. "What happened?" he demanded, already cutting away Jacob's shirt to expose the wound. "Shot," Nelini said tersely. 3, maybe 4 hours ago. Took time to stop the bleeding and get him on the horse. The bullet's still in there." "I tried to stop the bleeding, but I could not get the bullet out." Doc probed the wound with gentle fingers, his face grave. "It is deep. Missed the kidney, but might have nicked the intestine. I need to operate immediately." He looked up at Nelini. "This is going to be bad. He might not survive." "He will survive," Nelini said with absolute certainty. "He has to." Doc nodded and began pulling instruments from his cabinet, laying them out with precise care. "I need you to assist. Can you do that? Can you stay calm while I cut into him?" Nelini thought about the 9 days in captivity, thought about the fear and pain and helplessness, thought about how Jacob had pulled her from that darkness and taught her to be strong again. "Yes," she said, "I can do whatever is necessary." The surgery took 3 hours. 3 hours of holding Jacob down while Doc probed for the bullet. 3 hours of watching him scream through the leather strap they placed between his teeth. 3 hours of praying to spirits she was not sure existed anymore that this man, this good man, would survive. When Doc finally extracted the bullet,
a misshapen piece of lead no bigger than Nelini's thumbnail, she felt tears streaming down her face. Tears of relief, tears of exhaustion, tears of emotions she could not name.
"He will live," Doc said, washing blood from his hands. "But he needs rest. Days of it. Maybe weeks."
"We do not have days," Nelini said. "Jessup is planning to attack my people tomorrow night." Doc's face hardened. "Then we need to stop him. Tonight." A knock at the front door made them both freeze. Doc moved to the window, peered through a crack in the shutters, then turned back to Nelini with worry in his eyes. "It is Mayor Redding," he whispered, "with 2 of Jessup's men." Nelini's hand dropped to the pistol at her hip, but Doc shook his head. "Hide. In the back room, quickly." She wanted to argue, wanted to stand and fight, but Jacob's unconscious form on the table reminded her that some battles required strategy rather than courage. She slipped into the back room just as Doc opened the front door. "Mayor Redding?" Doc said, with forced politeness. "What brings you here at this hour?" Through the crack in the door, Nelini could see Redding enter, flanked by 2 rough-looking men she recognized from Jessup's camp. The mayor was perhaps 52, with the soft body and manicured hands of a man who made his living from other people's labor. "Doc Patterson," Redding said, his voice carrying the false warmth of a politician. "I'm looking for someone, an Apache woman, dangerous. There have been reports she might have come to town." "I have not seen anyone matching that description," Doc lied smoothly. Redding's eyes traveled around the room, noting the bloody rags in the basin, the surgical instruments still laid out on the side table. "Someone has been hurt," he observed. "Mining accident," Doc said. "Fellow got his leg crushed. I had to amputate below the knee. He's resting in the back." It was a good lie, believable, but Redding's eyes narrowed with suspicion. "I would like to see this patient." "He is heavily sedated," Doc protested. "I do not think that is wise." "I insist," Redding said, and his hand moved to rest on the pistol at his hip. Before Doc could respond, before Redding could push past him into the back room, the front door burst open again. This time it was Deputy Tom Ashford, breathing hard, his young face flushed with urgency. "Mayor," Tom gasped, "we have got a situation at the cantina. Fight broke out. Rosa Martinez is asking for you specifically." Redding scowled. "Can it not wait?" "She said it involved the railroad men," Tom pressed. "Said they are threatening to pull out of the deal if you do not come settle things personally." The magic words. Railroad. Deal. Money. Redding's greed overcame his suspicion. "Fine," he snapped. "But I will be back, Doc. And if I find out you are hiding that woman, there will be consequences." The mayor and his men left, Tom following behind. But before he closed the door, the young deputy caught Nelini's eye through the crack and gave her the smallest of nods. There had been no fight at Rosa's cantina. Tom had lied to save them. When they were gone, Nelini emerged from hiding. "How long will that buy us?" "An hour," Doc said. "Maybe less." He looked at Jacob's unconscious form. "He cannot be moved, not for days, which means you need to end this tonight." "How?" Nelini demanded. "I am one woman against an army." "No," said a voice from the doorway. "You are not." Nelini spun to find Rosa Martinez entering through the back door, followed by Tom and 3 other men Nelini did not recognize. One was the blacksmith, a massive man with arms like tree trunks. Another was the schoolteacher, a thin man with spectacles and a determined set to his jaw. The third was a grizzled old prospector who looked like he had been fighting since before Nelini was born. "Word has spread," Rosa said simply, "about what Redding has done, about what Jessup is planning. And there are people in this town who are tired of corruption, tired of good people suffering while evil men prosper. "Why now?" Nelini asked. "Why not before, when my parents were killed, when I was taken?" The schoolteacher stepped forward, shame on his face. "Because we were cowards. We told ourselves it was not our business, that someone else would handle it. But you, Miss Ashwood, you did not wait for someone else. You fought, and your courage shames our cowardice." The old prospector spat tobacco juice into a brass spittoon. "Besides," he said with a grin, "we are all getting old anyway. Might as well go out doing something that matters." Nelini felt something break open in her chest. Hope, perhaps, or simply the understanding that she was not alone, that there were still good people in the world willing to stand against darkness. "What do you need from us?" Tom asked. Nelini thought quickly. Jacob had the documents, the proof of conspiracy.
But proof was useless if Jessup succeeded in his massacre. They needed to stop him before he could move against the sacred springs, which meant they needed to bring the fight to him, here, now, in a way that would force him into the open where justice could be served. "We need to make Jessup come to us," Nelini said slowly. "Into town, where witnesses can see what kind of man he truly is." "How do we do that?" Rosa asked. Nelini smiled, and there was no humor in it, only cold determination. "We take something he values, his reputation, his credibility. We expose him publicly, in front of the whole town, in a way he cannot ignore and cannot escape." Over the next hour, they planned. Tom would spread word that there would be a public meeting in the town square at dawn, that evidence of corruption would be presented, that all citizens were invited to attend. Rosa would make sure the railroad officials heard about it. They had money invested in this deal. They would want to know if their business partners were criminals. The others would quietly spread the word to every decent person in Silver Ridge, fill the square with witnesses, make it impossible for Redding and Jessup to silence the truth with violence. And Nelini would stand in that square and speak, would tell her story, would present the documents, would force the town to choose between easy corruption and difficult justice. It was a terrible plan, dangerous, possibly suicidal. Jessup would come with his men. There would be violence. People might die. But it was the only plan they had. As the conspirators dispersed into the night to spread the word, Nelini sat beside Jacob's bed and took his hand. His skin was pale, his breathing shallow, but his pulse was steady, strong. "You taught me to fight," she whispered. "Now, I am going to finish what we started. And when you wake up, this will all be over. Justice will be served. And maybe, just maybe, we can both start learning how to live again." The night passed in anxious waiting. Nelini dozed in a chair beside Jacob's bed, her hand never leaving his. Doc checked his patient every hour, changing bandages, monitoring for fever, doing everything medical science could do to keep him alive. And outside, word spread through Silver Ridge like wildfire. There would be a reckoning at dawn. There would be truth spoken, and the town would have to choose what kind of place it wanted to be. When the first light of morning touched the eastern sky, Nelini rose and checked her weapons. 2 pistols, both loaded, a knife at her belt, and something more powerful than any weapon: the truth. She stepped out into the cool morning air and began walking toward the town square. Behind her, she heard footsteps. Rosa, Tom, Doc Patterson, the blacksmith and the teacher and the old prospector. Others joining them as they walked.
a shopkeeper, a widow, a young mother with fierce eyes. By the time Nelini reached the square, perhaps 40 people had gathered. Not a mob, not an army. Just ordinary people who had decided that enough was enough. On the far side of the square, drawn by reports of trouble, stood Mayor Redding, flanked by 6 of Jessup's men. And riding into the square from the south, his scarred face twisted with rage, came William Jessup himself with another 8 riders. 15 armed men against 40 unarmed townspeople. The odds should have been impossible. But Nelini had learned something in her weeks of suffering and survival. Numbers meant nothing compared to conviction. Force meant nothing compared to truth. She stepped to the center of the square, alone, unarmed except for the documents she carried in her hands. Every eye in the square fixed on her. "My name is Nelini Ashwood," she said, her voice ringing clear in the morning air. "Morning star of the Mescalero Apache, daughter of Thomas Ashwood and Ayanna of the Red Paint people. And I am here to speak truth." "This woman is a wanted criminal," Redding shouted, "a murderer. She should be arrested, not given a platform for lies." Nelini turned to face him directly. "Then let us speak of murder, Mayor. Let us speak of how your hired killers murdered my parents, burned our trading post, took me captive for 9 days while they debated whether to kill me or sell me." Murmurs rippled through the crowd, some shocked, some angry, some ashamed. "Lies," Redding spat. "All lies." "Then explain these," Nelini said, holding up the documents. "Land deeds with forged Apache signatures. Backdated sales to shell companies you control. $50,000 from the railroad, paid to you and William Jessup for clearing Apache from their legal land." She turned to address the crowd. "This man calls me a murderer. But the only thing I have killed is his scheme. The only blood on my hands is the blood he put there when his men tortured me." Jessup urged his horse forward, his hand on his pistol. "Enough of this. That woman belongs to me. She is my prisoner." "I belong to no one," Nelini said quietly. "Not anymore." "You will belong to the grave," Jessup snarled, drawing his weapon. And in that moment, everything hung in balance. Jessup's gun pointed at an unarmed woman. The townspeople watching, waiting, deciding whether to act or to look away like they had looked away so many times before. Then Deputy Tom Ashford stepped forward, his own pistol drawn, and aimed at Jessup. "Put it down, Jessup. This ends now." "You are one boy with one gun," Jessup laughed. "I have 15 men." 14, called the blacksmith, raising his massive sledgehammer. "I stand with the deputy." 13. Rosa lifted her shotgun, the barrel steady as stone. One by one, others joined them. The schoolteacher with his hunting rifle, the old prospector with twin pistols, the shopkeeper with a heavy cane. Not all armed, not all brave, but enough. More than enough. Jessup looked around the square and saw his empire crumbling. Saw the witnesses. Saw the determination. Saw that the easy violence he had relied on for so long would not work here. Not now. Not against people who had finally found their courage. "This is not over," he hissed. "Oh," said a new voice. "I rather think it is." Marshal Henry Caldwell rode into the square from the north, 4 federal deputies flanking him. Behind them came more riders, 20 men wearing badges, carrying rifles, representing the authority of law. "William Jessup," Caldwell said formally, "you are under arrest for murder, conspiracy, fraud, and about 15 other charges I will detail once I get you in chains. Same for you, Mayor Redding." "You have no proof," Redding protested, but his voice lacked conviction. Caldwell gestured to Nelini. "I have a witness. I have documents. And I have about 40 townspeople who look ready to testify. That is more proof than I need."
What happened next happened fast. Jessup made a desperate grab for his gun. Tom shot him in the shoulder, the same shoulder Coyote Pete had taken a bullet in days before. Jessup screamed and fell from his horse. Redding tried to run. The blacksmith's hammer caught him in the legs, dropping him to the dirt. Coyote Pete, wounded and bleeding from his shoulder injury at the mission, tried to draw his pistol with his left hand. The blacksmith's hammer caught him across the jaw, and he went down like a felled tree. The remaining outlaws, seeing all their leaders fall, seeing the federal marshals, seeing the crowd of angry townspeople, threw down their weapons and raised their hands in surrender. The remaining outlaws, seeing their leaders fall, seeing the federal marshals, seeing the crowd of angry townspeople, threw down their weapons and raised their hands in surrender. It was over. In less than 10 minutes, the conspiracy that had murdered innocents and threatened genocide had been broken. Justice, slow and imperfect but real, had finally arrived. Nelini stood in the center of the square, documents still clutched in her hands, and felt something she had not felt since the day her parents died. Relief, bone deep and overwhelming. Marshal Caldwell dismounted and approached her. "Miss Ashwood, on behalf of federal law, I apologize for what you have suffered, and I thank you for your courage."
"The law failed me," Nelini said quietly. "These people saved me." She gestured to the townspeople around her, to Rosa and Tom and Doc, and all the others who had stood when it mattered. "Then I am grateful for good people," Caldwell said simply. As the marshals chained Jessup and Redding, as the crowd began to disperse with the excited chatter of people who had witnessed history, Nelini turned and ran back to Doc Patterson's office. Jacob was awake, weak, pale, but conscious and alive. When he saw her, his face broke into a smile. "I heard gunshots. Thought you might need help." "It is done," Nelini said, taking his hand. "Jessup arrested. Redding arrested. Justice served." "You did it," Jacob said. "I knew you would." "We did it," Nelini corrected. "You and me, and a town full of people who remembered what it means to stand for something." Jacob squeezed her hand weakly. "So what happens now?" Nelini smiled, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, it was a smile of genuine hope. "Now we heal, both of us, and then we figure out what comes next." "Together?" Jacob asked. "Together," Nelini agreed. Outside, the sun climbed higher into the New Mexico sky, burning away the last shadows of night. And in a small room above a doctor's office, two broken people began the slow work of becoming whole again. The battle was won. The war was over. And the future, uncertain but bright with possibility, stretched out before them like an open road. 3 weeks had passed since the morning William Jessup and Mayor Samuel Redding had been led away in chains, and the New Mexico Territory was still processing what had happened in the dusty square of Silver Ridge. The trial had been swift by territorial standards, held in Santa Fe before a federal judge who had a reputation for hard justice and no patience for corruption. The evidence was overwhelming. The documents Doc Patterson had copied, the testimony of 40 witnesses from Silver Ridge, the physical scars on Nelini's wrists where chains had cut deep, the bodies of Thomas and Ayanna Ashwood, exhumed and examined, showing clear evidence of murder. William Jessup was sentenced to 20 years hard labor at the territorial prison in Yuma, Arizona, a place where the sun burned like hellfire and men learned what it meant to pay for their sins.
Mayor Samuel Redding received 15 years and was stripped of all property and title. The last anyone saw of him, he was weeping as the prison wagon carried him away, all his plans for wealth and power reduced to dust. The railroad company, facing public outrage and federal investigation, was forced to negotiate honestly with the Mescalero Apache. For the first time in territorial history, an Apache woman sat at the negotiating table as an official representative of her people. That woman was Nelini Ashwood. She stood now in the same federal courthouse where Jessup and Redding had been sentenced, but this time the atmosphere was different, hopeful rather than vengeful. The judge, a silver-haired man named Harrison, who had fought in the war and seen enough injustice to last 3 lifetimes, looked down from his bench with something approaching respect. "Miss Ashwood," he said formally, "the court recognizes your mother's lineage as legitimate proof of Apache claim to the lands surrounding the sacred springs. The previous sales and transfers are hereby declared null and void. The land is returned to the Mescalero people in perpetuity, with compensation to be paid by the railroad company for damages and distress." The words were legal and formal, but their meaning was profound. Justice. Real justice. Not the kind that came from guns and violence, but the kind that came from standing in the light and refusing to be silenced. Nelini bowed her head in acknowledgement, feeling the weight of her mother's necklace against her skin. She wished desperately that her parents could be here to see this moment. But perhaps, somewhere beyond the veil of death, they were watching. Perhaps they knew. After the proceedings ended, she found Jacob waiting outside the courthouse. He was thinner than he had been before the bullet, still moving carefully to avoid stressing the healing wound in his side. But he was alive, upright, and the smile on his bearded face was genuine. "Well?" he asked. "It is done," Nelini said. "The land is ours. The sacred springs are protected, and there is money to rebuild what was destroyed." Jacob nodded slowly. "Your parents would be proud." "I hope so," Nelini said quietly. She looked at him, this man who had saved her life and taught her to save herself, and felt something shift in her chest. Not the anger that had sustained her through captivity, not the fear that had driven her during the hunt. Something softer, warmer, something that felt dangerously like peace. "What will you do now?" Jacob asked. It was the question Nelini had been asking herself for 3 weeks. What did a person do when the quest for justice was over, when the enemy was defeated and the future stretched out like unmarked territory? "I do not know," she admitted. "Return to my people, I suppose. Help rebuild. Try to remember who I was before all of this." "And who were you?" Jacob asked gently. "Before?" Nelini thought about the girl she had been, Thomas and Ayana's daughter. A bridge between 2 worlds, comfortable in both, but fully belonging to neither. She had helped her father with trading, had learned her mother's songs and stories, had believed that the world could be a place where different peoples lived in peace. Then the world had taught her otherwise, had shown her its capacity for cruelty and hatred, had broken her and remade her into something harder. "I was softer," she said finally. "Kinder, more trusting." "You are still kind," Jacob said. "You could have killed those men at the creek, could have let me die at the mission, could have taken revenge instead of justice, but you did not. That takes a special kind of strength."
They began walking through Santa Fe's plaza, where vendors sold pottery and woven blankets, where children played and old men sat in the shade telling stories. Normal life, continuing as it always had, indifferent to the dramas that consumed individual hearts. "What about you?" Nelini asked. "What will you do?" Jacob was quiet for a long moment. "I was offered a job," he said finally. "Marshal Caldwell wants me as a deputy marshal. Says I have skills that would be useful to federal law enforcement." "Will you take it?" Jacob stopped walking and turned to face her. "That depends." "On what?" "On whether I would be doing it alone," he said quietly. Nelini's breath caught in her throat. She understood what he was asking, what he was offering. Partnership, not just in fighting, but in living, in building something new from the ashes of what they had lost. "Jacob Mackenzie," she said carefully, "are you asking me to be your partner?" "I suppose I am," he replied. "Not in the way most folks would think. I am not asking you to be some marshal's wife, sitting at home waiting for me to return. I am asking if you would consider working alongside me, building something together. Justice, peace, a life worth living." It was perhaps the most honest proposal Nelini had ever heard. No promises of romance or easy happiness, just the offer of shared purpose and mutual respect. "I would need my own space," she said slowly, thinking it through. "My own place to live. I have spent too long being someone's captive, someone's property. I need to belong to myself." "Agreed," Jacob said immediately. "And I would still be representative for my people, still have responsibilities to the Mescalero." "Of course." "And you would need to stop burning coffee," Nelini added, a hint of humor in her voice. "Because that is not a skill. That is a crime against nature." Jacob laughed, the sound warm and genuine. "I will work on it." They shook hands, sealing the agreement like the partners they had become. But the handshake lingered, became something else. Jacob pulled Nelini close, not forcefully, but gently, giving her every chance to step away. She did not step away. Their kiss was soft, tentative, the kiss of two people who had been broken by loss and were carefully, cautiously, learning to hope again. When they separated, Nelini rested her forehead against Jacob's chest and whispered, "I am scared." "Of what?" "Of being happy," she admitted, "of letting myself care again. What if something happens? What if I lose you, the way I lost everyone else?" Jacob's arms tightened around her. "You might," he said honestly. "Life does not come with guarantees. But I learned something from Aasha. She told me once that loving someone is always a risk. The question is whether the risk is worth the reward. And for me, the answer is yes. You are worth the risk." 6 months later, the New Mexico sun rose over a valley that had been transformed. The Mescalero camp near the sacred springs had grown, reinforced by families who had been scattered during the years of persecution. New wickiups stood alongside traditional structures. Children attended a school that taught both Apache traditions and English literacy, preparing them to navigate a world that demanded they be fluent in two cultures. The teacher at that school was Nelini Ashwood. She spent her mornings teaching children to read and write, and her afternoons teaching them the old songs, the old stories, ensuring that the knowledge of her mother's people would not be lost to time. Silver Ridge had changed as well. Doc Patterson served as mayor, reluctant but fair, determined to build a town based on justice rather than greed. Tom Ashford had been promoted to full deputy, representing the new generation's commitment to law over corruption. Rosa Martinez's cantina had become neutral ground, where Apache and whites traded goods and stories, slowly building the kind of understanding that might, eventually, lead to genuine peace. And on the ridge, overlooking both town and Apache lands, where the mountains met the sky in a jagged line of ancient stone, stood two cabins. One belonged to Nelini, small but comfortable, filled with her mother's weaving and her father's trading ledgers, a place that was entirely her own. The other, 50 yards away through a stand of ponderosa pine, belonged to Jacob. Larger, with room for the supplies and weapons of a man who spent half his time riding circuit as a deputy federal marshal. Between the two cabins ran a well-worn path, traveled daily by two people who had learned that love did not require living in each other's pockets. That partnership could be built on respect and independence as much as proximity. On this particular morning, Jacob sat on his porch cleaning his rifle, the familiar rhythm of the work soothing in its mundanity. He looked up when he heard footsteps on the path and smiled as Nelini emerged from the trees. She wore a mixture of cultures in her clothing, traditional Apache moccasins and a skirt decorated with turquoise, but also a white cotton blouse bought from Rosa's general store. Her hair was braided in the Apache way, but she wore a badge that marked her as an official translator for federal courts. "Coffee?" Jacob offered, gesturing to the pot bubbling over his fire. "Only if you did not make it," Nelini replied with a grin. "Rosa made it," Jacob admitted. "Dropped it off this morning with a lecture about how I am going to poison myself." They sat together on the porch, drinking coffee that did not taste like charred boot leather, watching the sun climb higher into the endless blue sky. In the distance, they could see smoke rising from the Mescalero camp. The normal smoke of cooking fires and daily life, not the smoke of destruction. "Marshal Caldwell sent word," Jacob said. "Cattle rustlers working the territory south of here. Apache herders are being harassed. He wants us to ride down and settle it." "Us?" Nelini asked. "You are better at talking to the Apache herders than I am," Jacob pointed out. "And I am better at convincing rustlers that their current career path is inadvisable. Seems like something we should handle together." Nelini considered the request. She had work at the school, responsibilities to her people. But she also had a commitment to the idea that justice should be available to everyone, not just those with political power. "When do we leave?" she asked. "Tomorrow at dawn," Jacob replied. "Give you time to arrange a substitute teacher." As they planned the trip, discussing routes and supplies and strategies, a rider appeared on the trail leading up from Silver Ridge. Young Tom Ashford, moving fast, his face flushed with urgency. He dismounted in a hurry and approached the porch. "Jacob, Miss Ashwood, we might have a problem." "What kind of problem?" Jacob asked, his hand instinctively moving to the rifle beside him. "New land company just rode into town," Tom explained. "Different outfit than the railroad, but asking the same kinds of questions about Apache territories. And they have got lawyers with them this time. Lots of lawyers." Nelini and Jacob exchanged a look. The fight, it seemed, was not over. Would perhaps never be truly over. There would always be someone trying to take what was not theirs. Always be injustice that needed opposing. Always be people who required protection from those with more power and fewer morals. But that was all right, because now there were people willing to stand against the darkness. People who had learned that courage was contagious, that one person's stand could inspire dozens, that justice was not something handed down from authority, but something built by ordinary people making extraordinary choices. "Tell them we will be in town within the hour," Jacob said. "And Tom, start gathering witnesses. Anyone who saw what happened last time. We are going to make it very clear, very quickly, that Silver Ridge is not open for that kind of business anymore." After Tom rode away, Nelini stood and checked the pistol she now wore openly, no longer hiding her capacity for violence, but also no longer defined by it. She was a teacher, a translator, a representative of her people, and when necessary, a fighter for justice. "Here we go again," she said. Jacob stood beside her, his hand finding hers naturally, comfortably. "Yeah, but this time, we are ready. This time, we have friends. This time, we are not alone." They walked together down the path towards Silver Ridge, where lawyers and land speculators would soon learn what the previous generation of predators had learned, that this territory had changed, that the people here, Apache and white alike, had found something worth protecting: each other. The sun climbed higher, burning away the morning mist, revealing a landscape both beautiful and harsh, unforgiving and full of possibility. In the distance, children's voices rose from the school, singing a song that blended Apache melody with English words. A new thing, a bridge between worlds. Nelini heard it and smiled. "My mother used to say that the strongest iron is forged in the hottest fire. I was broken in fire, reforged by blood, and tempered by justice. They took my family, my name, my peace, but they could not take my spirit. And in fighting back, I found something I had lost: my people, my purpose, and a stubborn mountain man who refused to let me fight alone." Jacob squeezed her hand. "Stubborn, that is the word you use?" "Among others," Nelini replied with a smile. They continued walking, and as they moved through the morning light, their shadows stretched long behind them, merged into one continuous line. Two people who had started as strangers had become allies, had grown into partners. Two people learning that healing was possible, that hope could be rebuilt from ruins, that love could grow in the spaces between scars. Behind them, the mountains stood eternal and unchanging, witnesses to countless human dramas played out across centuries. And ahead of them, the town of Silver Ridge waited, imperfect and flawed, but trying, in its stumbling way, to be better. This was not the end of their story. There would be more battles, more challenges, more moments when the darkness seemed overwhelming. But they would face those moments together, backed by a community that had learned the power of standing united. This was not a tale of revenge, though revenge had been tempting. This was not a tale of one hero saving the helpless, though salvation had played its part. This was a story of reclamation, of people taking back their dignity, their land, their right to exist without fear. And it was just beginning. Because every time injustice reared its head, there would be people like Jacob and Nelini and Doc and Rosa and Tom and 100 others, ready to stand in the gap, ready to speak truth, ready to fight not because fighting was glorious, but because some things were worth fighting for. In the year 1876, in the New Mexico Territory, a mountain man kept a promise to his dying wife. An Apache woman found the strength to reclaim her stolen life, and a community learned that justice was not something granted from above, but something built by the hands of those brave enough to demand it. That was the legacy they built, not perfect, not permanent, but real. And in a world that too often celebrated the powerful at the expense of the powerless, that was worth more than all the gold, in all the mountains, in all the West. The future stretched ahead, unknown and uncertain, full of both promise and peril. But they would face it together. And that, Jacob and Nelini had learned, made all the difference. The sun climbed higher, the day beckoned, and two partners walked forward into whatever came next, scarred but unbroken, tested but not destroyed, ready to build something that would outlast them both. A legacy of justice, a legacy of hope, a legacy worth living.